Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. Really glad to have you here today for this virtual Talks at Google event. My name is Andrew Phillips, a Googler based out of New York. Someone who grew up in an environment that has a pretty different approach to correction and rehabilitation. And so for me, like understanding the US criminal justice system, well, it's been surprising and challenging, let's put it that way. And that's why I'm really, really pleased today to be able to welcome Vivian Nixon, who'll be talking about her book, What We Know, Solutions from Our Experience in the Justice System. Vivian is the executive director of CCF, which is a New York-based organization that's committed to removing barriers to higher education for women with a criminal record. And she'll be talking to my esteemed Google colleague, Malika Saada Saar, who is YouTube's global head of human rights. Over to you, Malika. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Hey, everybody. Well, first, I want to begin by saying what an honor it is to have Vivian with us. As many of you know, I spent a number of years doing human rights work, and I have been in absolute awe and with deep respect of Vivian's leadership throughout. So it's an honor to bring her onto this conversation and have her part of our community. Thank you for being here, Vivian.
It is my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Malika.
Absolutely. So Vivian, can you share with us what your origin story is around your leadership on criminal justice reform?
Absolutely. I grew up wanting to be so many other things. I had a lovely family, hardworking, working class parents. But I struggled as a young person, and nobody really could understand why. And in our community, it wasn't common to see behavioral problems as something that could be medically treated. It was just behavior. And we had other ways of dealing with that. But I found out much later in life, of course, too late, that I struggled with depression and anxiety, even as a child, as a teenager. But having not been diagnosed or treated for those things, I tested well, I performed well at academic things, but I wasn't able to follow through. And failure after failure after failure led to low self-esteem, disappointed in myself, drug abuse, and I did 3.5 years in a prison and then another 4 years on probation. So the biggest thing to me, I think my core wound was my failures in the education department. And while I was incarcerated, I met so many other women, young girls, older women, who beyond having basic failures in education, they had been failed by our educational system to the point of illiteracy, and it stunned me because that wasn't my problem. Ability or a good school system wasn't my problem. I had both. I had ability and a good school system. So I became a tutor inside of the prison, and I just became passionate about making sure that every woman has access to high quality education.
And how did that passion, that commitment to education and women lead you to becoming really one of the premier leaders in the justice reform movement?
Well, as I was getting released, it came to this organization when I came home, College and Community Fellowship. There were a bunch of other women who had all been involved in the criminal justice system. At that time, they had all been incarcerated. Now we accept women who haven't actually been incarcerated. And the common themes were the impact that the justice system had on our lives, both before, during, and after incarceration. So before incarceration, we all could name a relative, a brother, a cousin, an uncle, a father, somebody who had been involved in the criminal justice system. And then, of course, having that experience ourselves was hugely impactful on our lives. And then afterwards, finding that we were now considered a new group of people to be cast aside in society because of having that criminal conviction. So much was not available to us. So I found a community that was struggling in the same way. And that really drove my passion. And because of that, took on some really big projects, like asking the government to restore Pell Grants to people who are currently incarcerated so that they can get access to college. And I met other people working in the criminal justice space on issues that are categorized as reentry issues helping people when they come home from prison, or helping people have better conditions of confinement inside of prison. And it just became my community over time.
So I want to kind of drill down more on the issue of women and incarceration, because I think as more and more of us become engaged in the justice reform conversation, policy ask, there is a way that there's knowledge around incarceration, mass incarceration, the need for reform, but there's less knowledge around what women go through.
Yeah.
And if we could talk about that a little bit more, you know, if you can share with us, because many who are part of this conversation within Google, they've not been to a women's prison. They've not visited a loved one at a women's prison. If you can share with us, what does it mean to be a woman behind bars?
It is, well, in my opinion, prisons in the United States are not built for human beings, much less women. But to the extent that they were built for men. All of the policies and procedures were designed for men. Women are subject to so much humiliation and just a lack of dignity inside of prisons. There have been, as recently as within the last 3 years, women have had to fight for things as basic as personal hygiene products, sanitary napkins, tampons, enough toilet paper. I mean, guards would say humiliating things and do humiliating things when women were in need just because of the bodies they were in. We fought for those changes. Amazing women leading a national movement. Andrea James at the National Council for Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls fought to make sure that women who get arrested and incarcerated while they're pregnant do not give birth to their children while they're shackled and handcuffed. And those fights were just about basic humanity.
You know, I was part of those fights at the federal level. As you know, Vivian, we did all the documentation of women who were shackled during childbirth. And I think it's important to describe what we mean, because often people don't take that in. When we say shackled during labor, childbirth, after childbirth, we mean documentation of women's arms being shackled, chains around women's legs, and even we did a documented case of a belly shackle around a woman in transport at 7 months. That these, when we talk about conditions of confinement, we are talking about this draconian way in which women have been historically, up until recently, shackled during childbirth, post-childbirth, and that this was the law and continues to be the law in too many situations where there are girls behind bars and they are not protected from statutes against being shackled.
And it's really more complex. It's so complex. Even though in many states we've passed anti-shackling laws, and the First Step Act has language in it. The First Step Act is something that's going to be boasted about from both sides of the aisle as we move up to this election. But let me tell you, the First Step Act had a lot of not so good stuff in it, and anything that was good in it has been rolled back by the Attorney General. So it put a clause in there that it's not our practice to shackle women, but it is up to the officer's discretion, which it always was anyway. So really nothing has changed. And so shackling is still happening to women during and after childbirth. And as far as young girls, this is where education comes in. Monique Morris has written a wonderful book that is now a film called Push Out. our school systems have ways that they treat girls of color, particularly Black girls, based solely on who they are, what their cultural identity is, and the way they behave, the way they're judged about how they talk, how they walk, how they dress, how they're much more apt to stand up for themselves and be very vocal about it. And they're being considered behavior problems and pushed into our criminal justice system. And girls are not safe inside our criminal justice system. And the documented cases across the country where women and girls enter prison not pregnant, and at some point while incarcerated get pregnant, without conjugal visits.
Right.
This means that there is rape going on inside our prison system, and no matter what the description of the circumstances are, because of the power dynamic, it is rape.
Absolutely. There's been so much documentation, both in women's prisons and girl detention centers, of unfortunately guards sexually assaulting, raping women and girls. You and I know the stories of women being coerced into sex in order to have their basic needs like sanitary pads be provided for. It is almost the common trope in too many situations where sexual assault is part of the sentence that women and girls must serve. Can we also talk about what it means to be a mother behind bars? Because we know that the majority of women who are incarcerated are mothers, and mothers to children under the age of 18.
Yes, and I have a lot of friends who experienced that, and the stories break my heart. I am not a mother and was not a mother while I was incarcerated, but every mother that I know, it was the biggest source of grief for them. And one thing that happens in a women's prison is that pain is so understood amongst women that we become each other's family. And when I was incarcerated, they were still incarcerating 16 and 17-year-olds here in New York State. And so every adult woman kind of adopted a couple of teenagers, and we created our own family structures so that everybody felt like they had a mother, and every mother felt like they were nurturing a child, because that helped heal some of the wounds. And it was so difficult for women to get visits. A lot of times their children were in the care of the foster care system, or a family member who didn't have the means to make the long trip, the expensive trip to bring children to see their mother. So many women went years, months without seeing their children. And it's sad for the mother, but it destroys children. And we've got to stop doing that in this country.
Absolutely. You know, when I would visit girls' detention centers, so many of the girls were there for being bought and sold. And so many of them were the daughters of mothers who had been sent away to prison. Yes. And we could see that if they had their mothers with them, they would not have been so vulnerable to being exploited. It is absolutely generational. I love, though, what you said about how mothers behind bars would take on the 16 and 17-year-old girls who were also incarcerated. It's the reminder that all the ways that we can create love and connection in defiance of the dehumanization that happens, that love can insist on being present even in these cages.
Well, love is an act of resistance against oppression and injustice.
Exactly right.
And anytime that you can muster up the capacity that you have to love in order to resist the evil in this world, it is what will get us through every moment of inflection that is before us. It's what has gotten us through those moments in the past. And we need to really lean on that right now. Yes. In this moment where there's so much vitriol and so much hate in the world. An informed person understands that resistance is about using the best of the power you have as a human being. And the best of that power is not the power to destroy, but it is the power to build up, to support, to love, and to be connected to a community.
And I think the way that you have been a leader in the community and the way that you talk about leadership from those directly impacted, that those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution, has been that kind of loving resistance against what is inhumane. Can you talk more about this community of individuals directly impacted who have been at the forefront of insisting on change and transformation from this place of loving resistance?
I certainly can. So in addition to running college and community fellowship, the community just grew and grew as I did this work, and I met other people running organizations across the country. And we formulated a network called the Formerly Incarcerated and Convicted People's Movement. All of us running organizations and seeing young people come up behind us who want to do this work, and saying somebody's got to nurture them, someone's got to show them what leadership looks like, and that's us. And so now this network of 15 organizations across the country is nurturing 35 burgeoning organizations, all run by younger people who have had interactions with the criminal justice system, but they want to bring healing to their communities in some way or another. And they're working on a variety of issues. Some work on voting rights, some are working on sentencing reform, some are working on conditions of confinement, others are working on, whatever is wrong in their particular community. But what we're doing is, with the help of our funders, providing resources to these organizations and technical assistance and training, and a family, a community that they belong to, so that we can not only be recognized for what we're capable of being in terms of leaders in this country, but also be reckoned with when it comes to walking into that voting booth.
Absolutely. I was doing this work at the first iteration of when we did reentry reform back under President Bush. And at that point, the movement for criminal justice reform was led by lawyers, right?
Yep.
And those who had the lived experience would be brought in for the horrible storytelling of what folks endured. And then they were politely told to go away, right? Thank you for your story. Thank you for your passion around your story. And then the lawyers, the advocates who were the lawyers, would go and huddle with the policymakers around the actual policy, because the thinking was those with the direct experience didn't have a role in the policy making. Can you talk about that? Because I know you were there for some of that as well.
Yeah.
And how you all have flipped the script around who deserves to be in the room.
Well, yes, I have to shout out to the people who were my mentors. I mean, the original script flippers, Divine Pryor, who is out there somewhere, and my dear friend Eddie Ellis, who has passed on, and so many others who kind of taught me that there's going to be a lot of conversations around this, and you're going to be in the audience, and you're going to sit in the audience, and you're going to be thinking, I know way more than this person, and what they're about to do is a big mistake, and here's why. And you're not going to be invited to give your opinion. You're not going to be invited to the table. Go to the room where they're having that conversation anyway, and bring a folding chair. Yeah. And eventually we kept pushing and pushing and making our voices heard, and they created space for us at the table. And that wasn't good enough for us. We are now creating our own table. We are setting an agenda and then going to policymakers and thought leaders and saying, here's what our suggestions are. And just with the technology is wonderful. Thank you, technology. And Google is definitely a big part of that. Because of COVID, we might have not been able to continue some of the work we're doing to educate legislators about these important issues. But because of this technology, we've been able to continue those conversations throughout the pandemic. And we've talked to over 50 legislators in the last few months about restoring Pell Grants in prisons, which the House has already voted to do. We're just waiting for the Senate. So yes, we have changed our position from being part of that display only to be used for our stories to a center of power around these issues. And we have a lot of supporters to thank for that. And Google is one of them. Thank you.
Well, you all did it, let's be clear. But what was one of the real challenges in flipping that script for you?
Well, for me, it was being a woman, because not only did I have to flip the script because of my felony status, I had to let the guys know that, hey, women are getting incarcerated too. And I know you guys are strong leaders, but there are issues that women are facing in prisons that you know nothing about. So one of the struggles was with formerly incarcerated men, getting them to accept my leadership. Mm-hmm. And give me my own space at the table. And thankfully, that has expanded, and there's so many more women leaders. Susan Burt, the list goes on. Mm-hmm. Susan working with her amazing work on housing and other justice issues. I mentioned Andrea. Deanna Hoskins is running one of the most premier justice organizations in the country, Just Leadership USA. Yes. And we have just made space for Black women. It seems to be the year of the Black woman.
Yes, absolutely. And I think in doing that work, in flipping the script, in centering the lives of those incarcerated, including and especially Black and brown women, it has become a powerful place of change that it was not before. Right. And I'm not sure folks who know the arc of the advocacy work appreciate that part of the reason why there's so much traction in this country right now on criminal justice reform is because you all demanded that people who have been impacted be at the center of the work. So I am very grateful to you, and all of us should be, because that is part of the reason why this issue now is more bipartisan and more part of popular culture than it ever has been before.
I deeply appreciate that acknowledgement, because for many years, we felt erased. We were out there doing this work. I've been doing it personally, just me, since 2000. Susan's been doing it since 1998. Norris Henderson's been doing it from before that. Darcy Nunn was doing it 10 years before that.
I have stories of Darcy Nunn and me back in the 90s around criminal justice reform in San Francisco. So yes,
but we were invisible. We were invisible.
Very invisible.
If all that hadn't happened, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for the acknowledgement.
Absolutely, and part of that change was within our own work of the lawyers and the advocates recognizing that they had to step aside, and also the foundations being willing to support work that was being led by formerly incarcerated, directly impacted individuals. Those were critical. So I want to get to the book that you all have done, What We Know, because the book is really in some ways a telling of how those closest to the problem know the solutions the best. And I would love if you could just real briefly pull out one of those narratives of how someone who, because of the lived experience, had the best disruption of what was impacting them and their community in a negative way.
Oh, there's so many. So just a brief history on the books. The Center for American Progress and the New Press approached Daryl Atkinson and I. He's a member of the network I talked about. and asked us if we would collaborate on a book of essays that were written by directly impacted people. Some of them still currently incarcerated. Mm-hmm. And we said, yes, we would review the essays and select 20 winners. To pick one to discuss is almost impossible because they're all passionate about what their opinions are. But I think I want to talk about Arthur Long today, because Arthur is still incarcerated. And he's been incarcerated way too long. The way he tells his story from the point of view of a foster child, a child that nobody wanted, and how all of the trauma related to being a foster child really landed him in prison, where he still feels sometimes like a little boy that nobody wants. Yet he has mustered up his gift, which is writing. Mm-hmm. And he has published poetry and short stories and is working on a book. And he has found a way to find the place in himself that is powerful. And other people have come along through education programs and other programs inside the prison to show him care and concern and love, to nurture that. But the point of his story is that the answer to our social problems, when a child doesn't have a place to live or parents to love them, the answer to that is not to create a system that criminalizes them. The answer to that is to find out who that child is, to nurture their gifts and help them to be who they were created to be. And a person doesn't have to be locked up for 20 years in order for that to happen. That is the point of his story. And there are 19 more like that in the book.
There's so much of what is powerful about those directly impacted being able to speak their truth. It's also that insistence on being seen, that insistence on your own humanity. And I wonder if you could share a little bit more about that, because these structures of incarceration are really organized around the denial of humanity. And this criminalization of being criminalized if you're a woman because you're addicted to a substance, being criminalized if you're a girl and you're being bought and sold, being criminalized if you're a boy and what should have put you in the principal's office puts you behind bars. Mm-hmm. There is this way in which mass incarceration has been about the systemic criminalization of the Black and brown body. Yeah. And so much of what is in this book is that act of resistance we were talking about, that insistence on being human and being seen despite that insistent criminalization.
Yes, because so everybody plays a role in this, and I'm realizing this more and more every year. The research ultimately was so stark concerning the disparities in the way we treat a Black body who has a confrontation with the law and the way we treat a white body. So Black and brown bodies are immediately confronted with suspicion and punishment. And there's almost no such thing as innocent until proven guilty if you are in a Black or brown body. And all of the studies that have been done comparing the way we are treated in the systems proves that. Right. So we have not yet gotten to those underlying structures in the American experiment that allow structural racism to influence every system that we are involved in, from education to criminal justice. And I think we're at a moment in time where people realize that. I think people are ready to have that conversation. I hope we don't drop it.
So talk more about that, because we are in this remarkable moment, this racial justice movement that has taken over all parts of our country, from small suburban rural areas to urban areas. It is a movement that looked very different than Ferguson, right? Ferguson certainly was part of where we are now, but Ferguson was not where we are now in terms of the reach, the expanse, the representation, and the unbelievable centering of this conversation in the popular imagination. Are you hopeful because of that?
Hopeful is the right word, because I'm not optimistic.
What's the difference?
So I am a big reader, and when it comes to finding my center of hope, I always go to two people, Cornel West and W.E.B. Du Bois. And Cornel West says optimism requires evidence. Like you do the calculations and you say, okay, the evidence shows that we are going in the right direction. But hope says, well, the evidence doesn't quite say that, but yet I believe that if I continue to resist, I can turn the tide. Mm-hmm. And Du Bois says that he talks about a hope that is, it's not hopeful. Like I'm not full of hope, but I don't feel hopeless. And that's why I can face another day of resistance. And I can do what I need to do tomorrow to be part of the resistance, whatever that is. If you look at this moment, there are people suffering now in every kind of body. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And it's about access to resources. It's about the economy. It's about how unbalanced our system has become, and the wealth gap, and those who are on the lower end of that gap, who have been treated like they were disposable for so many years, now being called essential at the cost of risking their own lives.
Yeah.
They begin to realize some common bond with those of us who have felt that way for centuries.
Indeed. Were you surprised by the quake that happened around the emergence of this movement in May?
No.
Why not? Why weren't you surprised?
Oh. The moment I saw the video clip the first time of a white police officer kneeling on the throat of a Black man over suspicion of passing a phony $20 bill, 400 years of history became very clear to me. Mm. Mm. It became so clear, and it was so horrendous, and it went on for so long, and there was such disdain in his eyes, such evidence that he did not see Mr. Floyd as a human being. I knew then that this was going to be an uprising like we had not seen in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I heard Ava DuVernay talk about how what was different about this video versus the Eric Garner video, where we also saw a man whose life was choked out of him. She said the difference with this video is that you could see the police officer's eyes.
Yes.
That goes to the issue that I'm curious to get your take on in terms of the role of technology in this movement and in the overall work of justice. You know, Brian Stevenson talks about how we have to be proximate. And if we are proximate, then that will be what helps us demand these types of changes. You know, these phones of ours are human rights tools. And in that moment of George Floyd, and before that, Eric Garner, and in so many other cases, those phones force the world to bear witness to the execution, to this modern day form of lynching that we saw with George Floyd. Do you feel that there is a way that technology does provide us another way of understanding and bearing witness to injustice, and moving us to take the next step?
It absolutely has the capacity to do that. And any innovation has to be taken with a measure of understanding that it can be used for power, but that power can be good. It can also be destructive. And so those who have in their hands the control of where technology goes and who have control over the parameters that are set, the limits, the boundaries of technology, have to be very careful not to get caught up in the in just amassing more and more and more technology for the sake of amassing and not for the sake of the good of our society. It is the very same thing we went through with nuclear proliferation, right?
Right.
Maybe a little bit of understanding this nuclear technology is a good thing for humanity, but too much of it will destroy us.
And I think at Google and other tech companies, there's often this question of, what does it mean to innovate from a rights-based context, right?
Yeah.
How do we think through these products that can be used for good? Because there's so many examples of how we know, to your point, that they can be used in very destructive ways.
Yes. But for the most part, it is a tool that has helped advocates do things we never would have been able to do with so little resources.
And I keep saying that we got to recognize what Darnella Frazier did in that moment, in the same way that we understand the power of Mamie Till, who insisted that her son be put in an open casket so that the world may bear witness to what was done to him. And Darnella had that kind of unbelievable courage to just stand there and make sure that the world would bear witness to what was happening to George Floyd.
Yeah, and she was saying, see us, see us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And a girl, right? A 16-year-old girl. There's so many questions that are coming through from our community that I want to pivot to that. Is that okay?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So let me see. I am going to read to you some of the questions that are coming in. So here's the first one. In your personal experience, at your direst moments, what did you do, tell yourself, or focus on to lean into that love and compassion that needed to be present in order to conquer that situation? It's a big question.
Yeah, that's a big one. I think in my darkest moments, I go back to my Nana, my grandmother, the person who loved me unconditionally. And I try to remember how much she believed in me and replace my self-doubt with her confidence.
Absolutely, absolutely. Here's another question. It's clear entertainment plays an important role on social perception. Do you find shows like Orange is the New Black to help bring visibility to women's incarceration conditions? Does it glorify it? Other thoughts?
I think Piper's book, and Piper is a dear friend and a true advocate. I think when that was made into a Netflix series, it changed the world for women who are incarcerated. It made us real that there really is a population of incarcerated women. Beyond that, I think we should be very careful about how we tell stories and who's in control of those stories, how those stories are represented to the public, and what the public learns to believe from that representation. Because these are real human beings' lives. For instance, a lot of people would make fun of when we were first quarantined. I feel like I'm in prison now. Like, no, it's not the same thing. So I think we should be really careful when we use these kind of really painful situations in forms of entertainment. If it is really for the education of the public, I think it's a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I think that a lot of folks have the question of what is the role of Google and YouTube as a company and individuals who are part of the company in being able to address all of these injustices around mass incarceration. I know that's a big question, but I would love if you could take that in pieces. Like, first, what do you feel this platform, this company can do in order to advance the work of liberation and justice?
Well, I mean, Google already does a lot in terms of offering free technology to a lot of nonprofits. And the YouTube platform has changed the ability of everybody to be represented in a way that mesmerized the world. So television and movies mesmerized the world when it was invented, and it brings people a lot of power. Well, now more people have access to that power of visual storytelling, which is a very powerful art form. More and more people are gaining access, and so you're seeing young artists become documentary filmmakers. And I'm so upset I can't remember his name, but there's a young man whose mother was cycling in and out of jails because of untreated mental illness, and he decided to do a documentary on his own mom. And I just watched it the other day, and I was just amazed at the way he's now able to access technology to say, I'm going to tell my story. It's a fabulous, fabulous thing. So keep doing that. Keep giving people access to these tools, and different ways to, at low cost, learn how to use these tools. Because, yeah, he could have gone to Columbia to get an MFA in filmmaking, but who has $65,000 a year, right? So keep doing that. One of the things, I think this is an innovation I don't think that you have thought of yet, but I just learned a little bit about building websites because I built a personal website, and this thing called SEO, where you put in descriptors of how people can find you on Google. And so I'm putting in the language I use, right? When I talk about myself, I say I'm a formerly incarcerated person. I'm a person who has been in prison. I'm a woman with a felony conviction. I don't use convict, ex-convict, felon, inmate, none of those words, right? So if I don't use that language on my website, nobody can find me. So maybe Google could join the movement to change the way we talk about people who've been involved with the criminal justice system.
Absolutely, because how we are named is how we are treated.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I think if I could put forward to you that question in terms of what can individuals do, and it might be best if first, before you answer that, you can share with us that, even though there is remarkable work that you have achieved around impacted leadership, around this beautiful book, around being part of this larger racial justice movement, what is the work for you in the year ahead around justice, and how can people plug into that work?
Absolutely. I have so much work in the year ahead. I don't know where to start. But the first thing we're doing is, as a network, the full network of formerly incarcerated and convicted people, and our website is ficpfm.org. We are doing Get Out the Vote. That is number one for us. We're not telling people who to vote for, but we are telling people, if you have the right to vote, vote. We have fought in several states over the last few years to get people their right, which had been taken away because of a felony conviction.
Can you just quickly explain that for folks who don't know that's
sure.
a thing?
All but 2 states in the United States have some restriction on voting once you have a felony conviction. Some let you vote once you're off parole. Some let you vote as soon as you're out of prison. Only 2 states let you vote while you're in prison, Vermont and Maine. But there are states that take away your voting rights for the rest of your life. Florida was one of them. And we have a wonderful fearless advocate in Florida, Desmond Meade of the Florida Restoration and Rights Coalition, who fought to get people with felony convictions their right to vote in Florida. 1.5 million people, mostly Black and brown people, now have a right to vote. Wow. So we're trying to get out the vote in the next 3 months. After that, College and Community Fellowship is bent on getting access to college inside every prison. As long as we're going to have confinement as one of the ways we deal with crime, and I hope that that is coming to an end, using it at least in the way that we use it and at the scale that we use it. But I know what it's like to be inside. And I know that education brings hope to people when they feel like they're not atrophying, that their minds are being nurtured, that they're seeing a possibility for their future. So Pell Grants are this close to becoming a reality. And that is the means by which we will fund college educations in prisons. So we'll be working on that in the next year.
And again, just back up a little bit to talk about what Pell Grants are, what happened to them, and that piece of the work that you're fixing.
In 1994, the omnibus crime bill that everyone refers to, and that is probably going to be discussed a lot during this campaign, took away, in addition to all of these harsh sentencing laws, it took away the right of students who are incarcerated to get federal assistance to go to school. When it was in existence, many colleges and universities went inside prisons. They taught the classes. The money went directly to the colleges and universities, not to the students, but it gave them a means to go inside and teach college courses. That was taken away in 1994. 330 some odd programs turned into 8 programs overnight because of the lack of that funding. We've managed to build up that funding through some baby steps along the way, including a pilot program called Second Chance Pell. But what we want now is the permanent restoration of Pell Grants, which are grants to pay for education for low-income students. And of course, by and large, people who are incarcerated have zero income. And many of them were very low income before they even were incarcerated.
And it's so critical in terms of re-entering the community, right? If you can come back to your community, to your family with a college degree, then it really reduces the likelihood of being re-engaged with the criminal justice system. It is a way out.
It is a way out, but not for the reason you would think. So a lot of people think it's a way out because people automatically say, oh, well, you have a college degree, it doesn't matter that you were in prison. No, that's not why it's a way out. It's a way out because what it does for you, how it transforms how you see yourself and your position in this world, and how you present as someone who is confident and capable. So yeah, it is a game changer.
Yes. Anything else that we should know that you are working on in this year ahead?
Yes, I'm working hard on the Just Us campaign. So we know COVID-19 is causing destruction everywhere it goes, but it's causing the most destruction inside of prisons, where people can't use hand sanitizer because it's contraband, because there's alcohol in it, where they can't social distance because you're in an 8-foot cell with 2 people, or they can't wash their hands frequently because they don't have access to running water. And the Just Leadership USA, lots of organizations went about trying to get people released because it's just horrible to be inside under those conditions. But Just Leadership USA took the approach of, well, what is the plan in these facilities when an emergency happens, and discovered that there are no emergency management plans required in correctional facilities. So in New Orleans, when Katrina hit, they had no plan. So you ended up with incarcerated people standing on a bridge hoping that the water didn't rise over the bridge. So Just Leadership USA has created the Just Us campaign, and in several states demanding that the legislator make it a requirement that every correctional facility have an emergency management plan that would deal with pandemics and natural disasters. Right now, we're launching in Wisconsin this week, I believe. We're already in Ohio and New York, and we hope to take it around the country. I'm the chair of that organization, and the CEO is Deanna Haskins.
So of those three huge areas of voting, restoring Pell Grants, and Just Us, ensuring that there is an emergency plan for those behind bars during this pandemic and any other emergency, how are the ways that we as Googlers can become part of that work, if we choose to?
Certainly you can, on all of the websites, JLUSA, collegeandcommunity.org, FICPFM.org. There's always a way to contribute financially, but there's also campaigns that show you how to let your local officials know what you think about these issues, to sign a petition or to call your local legislator that represents where you live and say you should vote yes for this. There's volunteer opportunities in some organizations. At CCF, in addition to our policy work, we help women go back to college. We have been doing that for 20 years. More than 400 women have earned college degrees because we provide that support. So if you're more interested in direct services, we do those direct services, get people jobs, help build careers. Also, our second generation program, some of our women who have younger children, we're making sure that they go to college as well. So just visit the website, see what the work looks like, and find a way to contribute financially, to volunteer, or to support the policy campaigns.
Say that website one more time, Vivian.
Collegeandcommunity.org.
Great. And you guys are based in New York.
We're based in New York, yes.
So we don't have that much more time, and I would love for you to just, share with us any final thoughts that this community of Google and YouTube folks should know from you. What is an observation, a truth, a statement that you need us to know, that we need to be able to take from you to bear witness to?
Well, I steal this from Brian Stevenson's, but it is so true because it's true for every human being. No one wants to be known forever by the worst thing they ever did. People who have been convicted of crimes and who have been to prison aren't the only people who have ever done things they regret. I think most of us can look back on our lives and see something that we deeply regret, maybe even a crime that we're glad we didn't get caught for. I ask you to look at formerly incarcerated people as just people that are capable of doing anything another person is capable of. And as you look around this world and see what is happening in the area of justice and where we have failed as a country, which has become more and more obvious over the last 4 years, ask yourself what you can do. If you work in technology, then do that with justice in mind. Mm. If you're an artist, then paint pictures that represent justice. If you're a writer, write stories that talk about love and justice. Mm-hmm. Whatever you do it with justice in mind.
Thank you, Vivian. I want to thank you for all of the grace and grit and beauty and brilliance that you bring to the work. I want to thank you for how you've changed the work and made it better. And I want to acknowledge you as one of the unsung heroes who has led this country to this moment of racial justice. Thank you for all of what you have given us, for this time that you've given us in the last hour. And as we end, we're going to put up the image of the book that I hope people go out and, well, I guess they can't go out and buy in the same way, but they certainly can get onto Amazon.
Yes, order the book. Order
the book.
Order it on Amazon, Goodreads, wherever. Just order.
Absolutely.
We're
Just
waiting to get on Audible though, so if you need to listen to it, wait. It'll be out soon.
wonderful. Thank you again, Vivian.
Thank you so much, Malika. This is great talking to you.
Good to talk to you. Blessings.
Same to you.
Bye-bye.